Welcome back to Fallout London. Today we're going to be taking a look at the heavy machine guns of Fallout London, of which we have 3 to look at today. These are going to include the Lewis gun, the Bren gun, and the MG42. And these are all really cool guns. These are all World War I/World War II era guns, and it's really cool to see them in a Fallout game. Now, funny enough, all of them actually have been in other Fallout games, where the MG42 is in Fallout 76, at least to my knowledge, and the Bren gun and the Lewis gun were both in Fallout Tactics, I believe. So this isn't even the first time that they're here, but this is the first time that we're going to at least get to play with the Lewis gun and the Bren gun in a first-person view. So these weapons tend to be more towards the mid and late game. You're not going to find these super early on, and most enemies actually don't carry these. I haven't really seen a whole lot of enemies carrying around the MG42 when I've played Fallout London, nor the Lewis gun. The Bren gun seems to be the most common one, especially from the Tommies. The Tommies carry this around all the time, which kind of makes sense since they're more of like World War I, World War II soldiers. So let's take a look at the Lewis gun. Start out with the earliest gun and work our way forward, I guess. The Lewis gun does 45 damage. This is full auto. All these weapons are full auto only. You can't switch them to semi-auto mode. So the damage is going to be a little bit low, but their DPS is going to be very high. The Lewis gun does have a very high amount of DPS. This has 109 rate of fire, very high rate of fire, 119 range, actually pretty long range as well, 64 accuracy. The Lewis gun is actually not very hard to keep on target because it barely has any recoil, and what recoil it does have is pretty much just straight up, so it's actually not very hard to control even at very long range. And the Lewis gun does weigh a lot. This weighs 26.5 weight, so very heavy. You're probably not going to want to carry a whole bunch of these around unless you do find them, because they are worth a whole lot. So if you do find them, pick them up. They're worth money if nothing else. The Lewis gun does hold the correct amount of ammo too in its pan magazine, holding 47 rounds, which is kind of a weird amount, but that is actually correct to a Lewis gun, so that is pretty awesome. And this is chambered by default in the 5mm, which would not be correct for a Lewis gun, at least in real life. But you can rechamber it to 303, which would be the correct ammunition that a Lewis gun would be using. You can also rechamber this to 45. So that would be another weird one. For the pros of all these weapons, really high rate of fire and a good amount of sustained fire as well. The DPS from these weapons is really, really good. Major cons to these weapons are that they are kind of a late game weapon, even by Fallout London standards. It's kind of hard to rush them if you want to get them. You could potentially rush a Bren gun by just killing Tommies, I guess, but that would be about the only way. And these are all very heavy. None of these are super lightweight. The Bren gun is the most lightweight of these, but even that one can get fairly heavy with different mods on it. These can get even heavier with mods when you throw them on there, especially like the MG42. That one can get really, really heavy. Lewis gun is very solid though. For an overall rating for the regular Lewis gun, I would say A tier. Those ones are really good fully automatic one. Plus, it looks so cool. It sounds so cool. It has a fantastic reload animation. Everything about it is awesome. Now let's talk about a modded version of the Lewis gun, which you can actually shove a whole bunch of different mods onto this one, surprisingly. So first up, you got the receiver, and you can actually change the receiver to whatever you'd like. I would say powerful receiver is probably the best. That keeps it in 5mm, and I think that's the best use of it because there's plenty of weapons that use the 303, and there's not a whole lot of weapons that use the 5mm, so this kind of gets a niche just for that. You could switch it to 45 if you want to do that, if you have a lot of 45 rounds too, because there's not really a whole lot of other fully auto weapons that would be competing with this besides like the Tommy guns. For a barrel, you can actually add a ton of different barrels to this. The one that I like the most is the incendiary barrel, which makes so you can light enemies on fire. So that's really good. You will need some science in order to get these as well as gun nut. So you can also turn this to lasers or to plasma. There's actually a lot of different options if you want to switch up the Lewis gun, making it extremely versatile for just about any sort of build. You can, interestingly enough, put the carry handle on it or have it off. It's off by default, which allows you to use the iron sights. If you have the carry handle, this goes over the top of your iron sights and your person will grip it, and you're just going to be staring at your person's hand. I don't like that as much. It's very awkward. The Lewis gun's actually really accurate, so I'd rather just use the iron sights that it comes with. For a magazine, I'd put the lightweight pan on here because it just makes it way less. It doesn't actually take down the amount of ammo you got, so that one's just a straight upgrade. And then I'd throw a compensator on this so that you just get some recoil reduction. This is really good. It's very, very strong. I think this is one of the strongest full auto weapons in the game. It sounds amazing and it looks amazing, so I always love this one. It is kind of heavy, and if you don't have a whole bunch of rounds, so it might not be the best if you don't have like the scavenger perk. But the Lewis gun, all tricked out like this, I'd say is like an S tier weapon. I think it's really, really good. Let's move over to the Bren gun now. The Bren gun is probably going to be the most common of these weapons that you're going to find. Mercenaries carry this around. Other high-level enemies carry this around. Sometimes the cannibals carry this around. The Bren gun, yeah, I mean, it looks iconic. It is a very cool gun from World War II. Funny enough, this is a British gun, but it is heavily inspired by a Czech gun. There's actually quite a lot of guns like this that were inspired by Czech guns. This one and the Japanese Type 99 or Type 100. I get the two mixed up between the submachine gun and the light machine gun. Whichever the light machine gun one was also copied from that same Czech gun, interestingly enough. And it's really cool to see a Bren gun, because Bren guns are super unappreciated in just about every game that I've played. Even in World War II games, it's very hard to actually find a Bren gun. You're more likely to find the Japanese version of this, but still, I think it deserves a bit more attention. So the Bren gun does the most amount of damage out of any of these weapons, since this one is chambered in 303, which does make sense. That actually is what a Bren gun is chambered in. This one does 75 damage per shot, which is quite high. The DPS is also fairly high from this because of its high base damage. Rate of fire is a little bit less than the Lewis gun at 90. That also kind of makes sense. The range on this is 119. Accuracy is very high of 81. It's very easy to be accurate with the Bren gun, even more so if you want to put scopes on it, which is kind of funny. This one does weigh 10.8 weight. This one is pretty heavy though, not as heavy as our other two machine guns, which does kind of make sense too, since this was supposed to be a light machine gun, or the designated light machine gun of the British. And this one is only chambered in 303. You can't switch the chambering of this, which does put it in kind of a unique position because it doesn't really have a whole lot of different mods that change it up a whole lot, unlike the Lewis gun or the MG42, which have a whole lot more. That being said though, the job that it does is actually really good, and if you have an excess of 303 rounds, you could throw it into this. For an overall rating for the Bren gun, I'd probably say this one's A tier as well. I think it's really nice. Mods are interesting because a lot of its mods don't change it, / have no effect on it because there isn't any other option for it. First up with the receiver, just throw the powerful receiver on here. That gets you the most amount of damage, although the damage isn't increased by that much. You can then either have the regular barrel or the silenced barrel. I put the silenced one on mine because you'll get more damage if you have Mr. Sandman. If you don't have that, then you can just keep the regular barrel though. This does have options for a mag and a stock, but you only have the standard stock and mags, so you can't switch those out. You might as well keep it. Sights are your choice. You can either go with the regular iron sights or glow sights. That's what I like to have on mine. But there are some scopes that you can throw on here. And the zoom is pretty substantial with this, which actually makes it so the recoil is more noticeable with the Bren gun. I kind of like just using it with the iron sights. I think that's good enough for most ranges. And then you can either have the bipod deployed or folded. It doesn't really matter. This doesn't actually affect your stats at all. So it's totally based on looks of what you like on the Bren gun, meaning that the Bren gun really doesn't change that much even with upgrades. So I'm going to keep it in A tier even with the modded upgrade. It is a little bit better, and if you can find a unique version of the Bren gun, awesome. It is probably going to be the most common of these three weapons to get a legendary for. I don't know of any legendaries that are actually in the game. I never got one, nor could I spawn one in from any of the other unique weapons, at least the ones that are listed anywhere that I could actually spawn in. So if you do find a Bren gun that's legendary, you're probably going to have to get it off of a legendary enemy. And then we move on to the big boy here with the MG42. The MG42 is a very iconic weapon, also a World War II weapon. This one was used by the German military at that time. So the MG42 is also depicted quite accurately here. It looks fantastic, and it sounds fantastic too. It sounds just like a buzzsaw, which is really good because this thing has the highest rate of fire out of any of these weapons. For the stats of the MG42, this one does 20 damage per hit, so less than the other ones here, but this one has an extremely high rate of fire and an extremely high amount of DPS with its 200 rate of fire. That is substantially more than the other weapons that we've talked about, double the Lewis gun pretty much. And this one has 203 range, which is very long range, 63 accuracy. However, if you plan on holding this down for any amount of time, it does bounce around a lot. So you probably want to be firing this in bursts or just dumping the mag at very close range. This one does hold 50 rounds in it with the regular mag, and it can go through that surprisingly fast. You can get an upgrade to a 100 round mag, which helps it out quite a bit. This one weighs a lot at 22.5 weight, and this one shoots the 5mm round. This one can also be rechambered into 303, but weirdly enough, the rechambering from 5mm to 303 actually doesn't increase your stats at all. It just switches the ammo types. So if you have more of one, then go with that. I would just say keep it in 5mm though, because that would be just more ammo efficient overall, since other weapons also use the 303. There's quite a few weapons that are competing with that round. This one also, I guess in real life, wouldn't be chambered in 5mm or 303, although 303 is a lot closer to it. It would be 8mm Mauser. Sadly, we don't have that, but this would basically be the only weapon, unless you wanted to rechamber like the Enfield into it as well. Either way, it's cool that we got an MG42, and it's really cool how much damage this one does. Just for an overall rating with this one, I'd probably also put it A tier. The immense amount of rate of fire that it has and the close range damage it has, it can clear up just about anything, and it gets even crazier with upgrades, so let's go over them. For a receiver, I would recommend the advanced receiver. Weirdly enough, the receivers actually aren't where you change the ammunition. That's actually just separate as its own little category down below, which is different. For a barrel, I would like the heavy improved barrel. That will just kind of help you out a little bit, gives you the best stats. I would recommend the large drum mag going up to 100 rounds. That makes this a lot better for sustained fire. That 50 rounds, even though 50 rounds is usually a lot for most weapons, this one chews right through it. So 100 rounds is, I think, the way to go. This doesn't have any sights. Iron sights are the only thing that you get, which is perfectly fine. The iron sights are actually pretty good on this. I put a compensator on mine so that it doesn't bounce around quite as much. It has a little bit more stability, even though it's still bouncing around a decent amount at longer ranges. One thing that is really interesting, though, is the ammo types that you can load into this, and the best one by far is the high explosive rounds. The high explosive ammunition gets you so much more damage. You go from 20 base damage, and I think with the advanced receiver I was up to like 25 base damage, all the way up to like 95 damage. It is insane, and this is basically just the explosive effect added onto your weapon. You do need Demo Expert maxed out to throw this on there, but if you thought the spray and pray was pretty crazy from Fallout 4, this one has way higher stats than that and has a much higher rate of fire than it. So this one is even more crazy, which also makes it even more dangerous to be using at very close range, because explosives do work on you the same way they work on enemies. And then lastly, I would keep this in the 5mm instead of the 303, unless you just have an abundance of 303 rounds and you don't plan on using it for anything else. This gun is probably one of the strongest weapons in the entire game of Fallout London. It is really, really good. With the explosive rounds, it just chews through absolutely everything. You're not going to be able to get that until late game, but it makes for a very powerful late game weapon. I imagine it would be even more powerful if you also managed to get an explosive MG42, because this would basically be stacking explosives on explosives. That would be pretty terrifying. So MG42, also going to go all the way up into S tier. Very good weapon. All of these weapons are actually really good in Fallout London. I'm glad that they made it in. Tell me your thoughts on these weapons and what weapon you would like to see next in London. Thinking about doing like all the 9mm pistols up next, or maybe all the spy pistols, because we've got quite a few of them too. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye!